So welcome to The Happy Mindset, the show that brings you insights, realizations, and lessons learned in order to help you to live a life you love. Today's episode is episode number 28, and today's episode title is Lessons Learned from a Year of Podcasting. So today's episode is slightly different from the normal. Today I'm just going to talk myself about the lessons I've learned over the last year of interviewing different guests, and I'll also talk a little bit more about the intention I created The Happy Mindset with. So to start off, the podcast I created with the intention of really exploring the mind. I brought on people who had backgrounds in the state of mind, and I brought on people who had achieved things in their life where they shouldn't have had. And I was curious about how did they go about achieving that when society would tell you otherwise, that you can't attain that. So that was basically the intention it started with. I wanted to understand myself a bit better as well. I wanted to understand my mind. I wanted to understand what was possible. The Happy Mindset itself actually comes from my own desire to understand myself fundamentally. And it came from, I guess, probably one of the darkest moments in my life when I was 22. I went through psychosis, and it was a very difficult time for me. And it didn't make sense for a long time, and it's still only making a bit of sense as I move forward. But I wanted to explore the mind more and exactly what was going on around me. I found that when I went through that, I was confused. I didn't understand what was going on, and I wanted to. I guess at that time I had kind of two choices. I could either go down the route of being a victim for the rest of my life and blaming my environment, which would never lead to a good outcome for me, or I could get curious about it and kind of see what actually happened here, what was missing in my education, what was missing in just my understanding of life. So that was the moment I decided to take my education into my own hands. I was no longer waiting to be educated. I wanted to find out for myself what is actually going to be useful for me here. What are the life skills I need to learn to get on well in life? What are the actual things I need to know? So that was a turning point, and that gave me the motivation and the desire to really wake myself up and create a life that I'd be happy with. So that's basically where the Happy Mindset comes from. I have found that in order to really appreciate the good times and happy times, sometimes you need to go through some dark times to wake yourself up. And in those moments, you've got two choices. You can either continue down a dark path, or you can choose to harness that energy to create something you can be proud of in the world. So that's the intention it was created with. It was a bit of a process, but we eventually got there. And then with the guests, the lessons I've learned from the guests too is that at the end of the day, everybody's human. We all actually have superpowers within us in the extent that if we believe in ourselves and we persist and we gain the practical knowledge to reach our goals, then I do believe that anything is pretty much possible. It's not easy. It's quite simple though. It's simple principles of believing in yourself, persisting, getting mentors, getting feedback. These are simple things you can do. They're not easy things, but they're simple, straightforward things. It's not like there's no map there. So from the guests I've had on, I've realized that a lot of the people I've had on have had these things in their life. They've had mentors, they've had pivotal moments in their life where things have gone wrong and they've really questioned what they want to learn from this. So I started to realize from this podcast that there's always a lesson to be learned somewhere, and oftentimes it's in the mistakes and the failures in our darkest moments where the biggest lessons are hidden. And when we can get to those lessons, the successes come from that more than anything else. I've realized that a lot of it is about being true to yourself, and to talk about the things you want to talk about, and to find your group that way. I guess from doing the podcast too, and from doing the Happy Mindset, I've gone more in the direction of really just being myself as much as I can, and to follow the things I'm curious about and the things that I'm happy spending my time on. So, at the start, it wasn't like that as much, But as I've moved on, you reach stages where you're putting in so much work that you're like, do I want to be living my own life, or do I want to be living a life that I think other people want me to be living? So from the guests themselves, I've also seen that there's always a story behind somebody's success, and oftentimes we don't get to hear the real story. And I found that people in general, the people who are succeeding in life, they're willing to share their story honestly, and so that other people can learn from the lessons that they learned to get to where they are. So a lot of the intention behind my interviews is to help somebody who is potentially a few years behind where my guest is, or maybe a few decades behind, just to help them to see that they started from somewhere. Like they weren't always like that, and they had lessons to learn. Their personality changed over time as well to grow into the person they needed to become. So I really wanted to highlight that because I didn't always know that. I sometimes presumed that these people we see who are influencers were always like that, or they always had good knowledge, or they just and that kind of is confusing because you put people on a pedestal and you don't realize there's a human evolutionary process that goes on there, where they didn't come out just like that from the womb. So that's one of the filters I have for my guests. I get them on and I look at like where they've been and where they've come from, where did they get to, just to share some insights into the lessons they've learned along the way, so that if you're facing a similar circumstance right now, you've got more of an insight into how you could potentially look at it and where the lesson could be hidden, in which direction. So a lot of it is just knowing the sense of direction you want to head in. So my guests, if you listen to the episodes, you realize that they're quite diverse. Their personalities are different. They have different stories, different backgrounds. But it's the general direction that people go in. So the guests on my show, generally, they'll have taken an internal route where they're leading a life more in alignment with who they want to be, who they actually are. That's important, that instead of looking outside themselves for validation and that thing, most of my guests who've come on, they're already looking internally. Well, all the guests pretty much actually are all looking internally in some direction, that they've realized that it's not the outside world that's going to give you validation or a sense of belonging or a sense of meaning. It's more an internal journey you go on. So a lot of the time you can spend your life when you're looking at the external world. I know in my own life when I was growing up, it was quite confusing when you're looking for validation from your external environment, or you're looking for the right direction in your life from your external environment. It can be quite confusing. And so the podcast was set up with the intention of, when you start looking internally, it's a bit more hard work to start doing that, because there's so many messages around you day by day which is telling you the opposite. But eventually you get used to it, and you get used to listening to yourself more. It gets a bit easier. Initially it's hard, but it does lead to an easier life. So that's kind of where the phrase easy choice is hard life, hard choice is easy life comes from. Because what does happen is that it's hard to start off with, to try and listen to yourself, because oftentimes you'll feel crazy to do the things you're doing, especially if you're trying to follow along to a narrative you haven't written. But what ends up happening is that it actually starts making more sense. That narrative you've written for yourself will make more sense to you, even though other people might not understand it, which leads to an easier life. You've less in your mind, and you can actually, it leads to a better relationship with feedback. So when you know the purpose and the mission for where you're heading, it's easier to take on the necessary lessons that you need to learn along the way. So when you haven't got a purpose, a mission, or a vision for your life, it's a lot harder to take on the difficult messages, the difficult lessons that you need to learn, because you don't see the overall big picture purpose of why you're learning the lesson. So that's a key thing. From the guests too, I've realized too that anybody can start a podcast if you've got the right intention, you've got clarity around it. When I started off, I didn't have an audience. For the first 18 to 20 episodes, there's very few people listening. It's gradually getting bigger, but had I waited for an audience, or had I waited for a feeling of confidence that I was credible enough, I'd still be waiting. The podcast wouldn't exist. The Happy Mindset wouldn't exist. So my recommendation for anybody thinking of starting a podcast is just do it. Just get the first few episodes created. When I look back from episode 1, The first 10 episodes I did on Skype, and there was issues towards the end with connectivity and stuff. And looking back, I'm like, of course, if I started the podcast now, it would look better and I'd be a bit more professional about it. But if I had waited, I wouldn't be in this position where I can do a better job. The only reason I can do a little bit better job today is because I went through 27 episodes of doing it and getting more comfortable with it. And I wouldn't be able to do it better today if I hadn't that experience. So it's kind of, I'm definitely a philosophy of it's better done than perfect. And when something's done, you can improve on it. You can build momentum. The thing is, you can never build momentum on something that's perfect in your head. You can only build momentum on something that's actually out in the real world and done. So you can iterate and make it better. So that's a key thing. Just get it done. Just get it out there. Don't worry too much about how professional it looks. Like when I started this podcast, I bought a Blue Yeti microphone. I bought recording software for Skype, and that was pretty much it. I created a YouTube channel, put it up there. My hosting service is Anchor. It's actually free to use now, so you can just set up an account, post podcasts on there. So it doesn't take a lot of time, doesn't take a lot of effort. The biggest part is what podcast do you want to create, what's the intention, and then just get it out there. The thing is, you can experiment with it too. If you did a few episodes and you realize podcasting isn't for me, you can move on to something else. Like it's not a big deal. Then after that, what I've realized from doing a podcast too, it actually expands your network quite a lot. I've just noticed my Facebook has changed quite a lot. My LinkedIn has changed quite a lot. The people within the different circles are more aligned with the things I care most about, which are education, growth mindset, looking at our beliefs, looking at our habits, all this stuff. This is the kind of stuff that really interests me, the psychology element of learning. And I have more people in my network now who are interested in that type of stuff. Whereas before, I wouldn't have had as many people in my network who were just as interested in the stuff I was interested in. One thing that's helped me too to move to different networks, different connections, is that there's no real judgment here. It's really just follow what you're most interested in. If you've got people around you right now who aren't interested in the same things as you, you're probably better off spending more time with people who are interested in the things with you, because you can't force people to be interested in what you're interested in, but you can find people who are already interested in what you're interested in. So if you think about like the 80-20 principle, try and spend 80% of your time with people who are interested in the same things as you, and 20% maybe with people who aren't as interested. This was something I struggled with before until I started realizing it's not a judgment thing. It's more about following what you're interested in and surrounding yourself with people who can help you to get better at your interests, or who can just engage in conversation with you around those interests. So yeah, that's how I think of the 80-20 now, because when I started off, I was still spending 80% of my time with people who weren't interested in what I was interested in, and I was spending 20% potentially with the people who were interested in what I was interested in. So if I had to go back, I would flip that dynamic quicker. It just makes more sense in the long run if you want to move towards a life you want to create. Then from the I think that they're the main lessons. I guess when it comes to reaching out to people too, what I found is that just reach out to them, be respectful. Just say what your intention is, why you're reaching out to them. Ideally reach out to people that you're already following. You know what their work's about. You actually genuinely do want them to have them on the podcast, and just reach out to them. Tell them that. Have no expectation. Just send out the message. Not everybody's going to say yes. But some people will say yes, and you'll be surprised by the caliber of people who will say yes sometimes. So that's what I've learned too, is that if you put things out there with the right intention, just focus on the intention and don't worry about the result. So let go of expectations as much as you can. Work on things with the right intention, and you've less in your mind that you're trying to control or trying to preempt and that kind of stuff. That's just a busy mind that gets nothing done. So they're the main lessons. If I'm forgetting something, or if you're curious about anything else, you can always reach out to me. Head on over to Facebook. I've got a group there called the Happy Mindset Mindful Language Hackers. So in that group, we focus a lot on confidence, like speaking with confidence. So I help you to learn another language, but I focus a lot on what are the fears, what are the uncomfortable emotions that are holding you back from from getting better at the language, from communicating with people, from speaking, from doing the things you want to do. We really focus on your values, your goals, the mindset, those types of things that are really going to help you to create a life that you're going to be happy with. So yeah, so you can reach out to me there or head on over to thehappymindset.com. You can check out my website there. So I hope you learned something from this. I hope you know a bit more about me and the Happy Mindset and what the intention was in creating it. And so thanks for listening, and until next time, have fun and enjoy the process.